So, welcome everybody to this second webinar we host this year. I hope you can all hear me well. If you cannot hear me, please raise your hands or send me a little chat message, but I presume you can hear me well. So welcome everybody on this webinar where we will try and give you some hands-on tools and accelerators to improve your vendor and contract management. And of course, we all know that tools are quite important these days. And when we look into critical success factors of implementing contract and vendor management processes, we have seen that based on a study that was executed, I think end of 2018, beginning of 2019 by E&Y, we have seen that these are the typical critical success factors of implementing contract and vendor management. And the study has proven that indeed, well, quite important are the benefits you need to make sure your contract and vendor management is measuring. Quite important that you have indeed your coherence internally and with the supplier, so you have to be on one line, so it enrolls in responsibility speaking. You have to have top management support for sure. Without any top management support, you cannot implement any process. And of course, you need to have your governance structure and relationship in place. And so it continues. But what we see here at the bottom is that enabling technologies are quite far down the road as a critical success factor. And that explains a lot, because what we often see is that a fool with a tool is still a fool. And I'm not underestimating the importance of tools, and I'm not underestimating the importance of technology, but I do see the importance of having the right people supporting it in terms of top management, having the right governance in place, and having the right controls in place to execute and implement your contract and vendor management. So without this being said, and we have already done a couple of sessions on those processes, we will not elaborate on the processes today. We will merely focus on the tools, and we hope that indeed when you start implementing a couple of the tools that are available on our website, and you can find it in the tools section on our website, where we have a couple of tools that we will showcase you today available to you. So when we explain the tools that you indeed think about, well, I need to have some sort of a process in support of my tool. And we will repeat that during the session a couple of times today, but I'd like to stress it, and a couple of studies that have been executed by renowned companies like E&Y have also proven this exact same point here. Now, when we talk about tools and accelerators, I do believe that there are different types of tools. On the one hand, you have your strategic tools and accelerators, that make you think about the setup of things, how to do things. Secondly, there's your tactical tools and accelerators in terms of helping you to execute things. And then thirdly, there's the operational tools and accelerators that helps you to really monitor, manage your process execution. And when we talk about strategic tools, we will further elaborate today on two important points to start with. First of all, your contract and your vendor classification elements. Secondly, your data tooling and quality assessment, because where your data resides is also quite important in leveraging the most value out of your tool, which will then indeed be translated in how you implement your contract and vendor management through a roadmap. And we have that available as well as a tool because it's a project execution, which is quite important to follow. And then last but not least, of course, there's the whole element of executing your contract and vendor management process through contract lifecycle management, through third-party risk management, and through supplier relationship management. And that will be further explained indeed how we have tackled that with indeed the functionalities we offer in a software called Sourcing Cockpit, and which will be explained with our partner we have on board here today, which is Tony, which will further elaborate on this, and the tactical tool will be further elaborated. My colleague who is next to me here in the office, Koen Verkouteren, who will tackle that tactical part of the tool. And I will focus on the strategic elements of the tooling and will further guide you with explaining how we have translated that into some useful tools you can again download from our website, and that will be shown at the end of the webinar session. So without further ado, let's dive into the strategic tools and accelerators. Yeah. First of all, and that explains again here the part we focus on, well, we see that not every vendor is a partner. And you for sure know that. I do believe that quite a bit of vendors want to be a partner, but they are not necessarily a partner into your organization. Secondly, not every contract is critical. And I do believe that quite too many people have the feeling that their contract is critical. And not only the internal people, but also the vendors have the feeling their contract is critical without having the right criteria and approach to classify both. Yeah. And I do mean you need both. You need to have a vendor classification methodology and you need to have a contract classification methodology to not only manage and your mutual expectation on the collaboration, but also, very importantly, to spend your effort wisely. And again, that needs to be translated in your operational tools for sure. And your operational tools should allow you to classify your partners in maybe a category management approach, but should also allow you to classify your contracts into their criticality, non-critical, or low spend, high spend type of elements. And these are the things you need to tackle first in your strategy before you implement any tool. So if you just start blindly with implementing a tool without having a good vendor classification approach and criteria, and without having a good contract classification approach and criteria, you might end up with spending your effort in a place that you don't want to spend your effort in. And that's where we come in with our tools. So we have, first of all, again, you can download it from our website. We have built a vendor classification tool as a strategic enabler, yeah, where you can, with your sticky notes, with post-it notes, use this as a, and I know it's quite difficult if you have obey us type of rooms where you would be doing that in person. Well, now you can do it digitally, where we provide you with a vendor classification matrix that is on the one side based on the dependency you have on your vendor, and on the other side based on the relationship type you have with your vendor. And the dependency can be low on a certain vendor, but your relationship could be quite relational. So that means when the dependency is low and your relationship is relational, that you will very probably end up with a critical relationship with that partner. And that might lead into specific elements in your process that you will execute on the operational side. Quite important. Again, here, you will not spend the same amount of time on a transactional vendor as opposed to a partnership relationship. Question is, do you have the right criteria to classify your vendors and elements? We offer you a tool that would help you enable to do that vendor classification. A very important starting point. As I said, not every vendor is a partner. Manage also their expectations by communicating in what area they reside, and then you can have your relationship management executed according to the classification you have put them in. Quite important. Our software, Sourcing Cockpit, also supports this operational vendor classification. Second, your contract classification. Also here, not every contract is critical. Not every contract you need to do a monthly review. Not every contract you want to do every month a governance session with your on that specific contract. Also here we offer a tool that you can use with sticky notes to classify your contracts into, on the one side, a monetary value. Is that a large spend versus a lower spend? And then also secondly, versus the business criticality of the contract. And that might be indeed, again, a high spend, but a low business criticality. So ending up in what we call a tactical contract. And then you have your strategic contracts, which are, of course, in high spend and are enabling to the business criticality, meaning that they would be having a lot more interactions on the contract level. And this double view is quite important to know with a vendor, which might be classified, for instance, in a legacy or in a transitional category as a vendor, that you might have multiple contracts which would be split on the one side on business critical contract, but even non-business critical contracts with the low value that could reside even with a partnership relationship. And that double view is quite important to start with from a strategic point of view, to translate it again into your software, because as I said, a fool with a tool is still a fool. If you cannot classify your vendors and you cannot classify your contracts, you might spend your time in a place where you don't want to spend it, or maybe overspend it in governance and overspend it in risk assessments and the like. That's quite an important strategic starting point to begin with. Yeah. As I said, a fool with a tool is still a fool. You can give a hammer to somebody, and there's a great expression in English that says, if you give somebody a hammer, everything will look like a nail. But if you use the hammer differently, well, that is not where you want to use the hammer for. Secondly, data is the new gold, and those two go hand in hand. On the one side, you have your technology tooling, which holds a lot of data. On the other side, you need to know what to do with your tooling and your data. And what we have developed for that is also a tooling and data quality assessment, where indeed during the different phases of your contract lifecycle, so in the master data of your contract, the specific contract elements like your contract awarding procedures and the like, your service data when it comes to unit prices, when it comes to KPIs and SLAs, your financial data when it comes to indeed the contract value, the performance data, so the adherence of the governance and the KPIs, and then of course the compliance data that is to do with your audit trail and your regulatory compliance needs. All these elements in your contract lifecycle have data, and they have data where there's a certain source where the data resides, how you collect the data, what the quality of the data is, how complete your data is, what your satisfaction with your tooling is, and what the annual spend is on that tool. And this picture will give you a strategic view in where the gaps are into your tooling and data landscape. And as I said, a fool with a tool is still a fool, but if you do not know where your data is, what quality your data is residing, and how much money it costs to manage and maintain that data, well, that will make you running blind quite significantly into the execution of your contract management. And when we zoom in into one of these areas, you can clearly see that indeed your data source can be internal, but it can also be external. Not all your data resides with you. It could well be that part of the data, for instance, your performance management core data, might be externally managed, so might be external on the provider side. That is not necessarily bad, but you have to at least know where the data source is. Secondly, how do you collect the data? Is that predominantly a manual process, or is that an automated process? Also here, it is quite important into your different data sources. So for the contract data, for your performance data, for your compliance data, how do I collect my data in a certain tool? Thirdly, what is my data quality? I can have a lot of automation in my data collection, but with a very poor quality. That leaves me with quite a bit of a gap in the efficiency on the implementation of any tool you might have in your lifecycle management. And then, of course, the completeness of my data. I might collect it quite automatically with a medium quality, but it is not complete. So I miss a lot of data. I miss out of the 20 or 30 providers I have, I only have it for 2 or 3, and I miss 18 out of the 20 providers I have in my data completeness. And then, of course, my tooling satisfaction. That goes from low to medium high. I can have a good automation with a high quality, but I'm so unsatisfied for any good reason. It might be too expensive. It might be a very bad interface. It might be very poor APIs that you have onto that tool specifically. And that image, we have available as a tool to help you strategically think, on the one side, how do I classify my vendors? Secondly, how do I classify my contracts on those vendors? And then thirdly, how do I all put it together into my current tooling landscape? And that will give you a first strategic view on where you want to go, into implementing a tool that helps you indeed during your life cycle manage and monitor your different data sources and your different processes. Yeah, and for that to be working well, right, from a strategic to an operational implementation, of course, you need to have your tactical tool in between. And your tactical tool very typically is your roadmap, is a journey. And we have designed, before we go into the operational side of the implementation of the tooling, sourcing Cockpit, which helps you indeed by implementing that life cycle, the risk management and the relationship management. Yeah, we have also developed for our clients a contract and vendor management roadmap and journey. And this will now be explained by my colleague Koen, which is an expert in this domain, and he will explain you how that journey typically runs from the idea all the way up to the implementation. Please, up to you, Koen.
Thank you, Dominique, for the introduction. Yes, indeed, as you have said, we indeed see this as a journey. So, as with all great journeys, you need to have a plan, a step-by-step approach. But it doesn't have to be a plain road from A to Z. So we know that sometimes you can stick a bit longer at one stage before moving on to the next. And that's completely normal. So we see clients doing quite some of the different phases by themselves, doing it perfectly well, and then perhaps asking for some expert advice, some consultancy on other phases. Okay. So let's start the journey. The first step, and then you can go to the next slide, is to see in the diagnostic phase where we currently stand. It's very important to know your current position before you can start moving on to the next ones. So what are some important activities that you need to do in this phase? Well, the first thing we advise is to look at your current processes, your current maturity. This is not that different from typical maturity models, CMMI or others, where you have typically 5 levels of maturity. You can have an initial level of maturity, a repeatable, and so on, up until the Valhalla, which is an optimized maturity level. What we see in the market nowadays is a lot of companies starting to experiment with supply relationship management, with contract management, with vendor management. And they are in an initial phase or sometimes in a repeatable phase. The goal is, of course, in that respect, to get more mature and move on to the next phase of maturity. Know that it's not always a straightforward journey. It takes some time to move up from one level of maturity to the next one. So we always advise to take it step by step, start small in your implementation, and then along the way, get bigger, get better, and do some refresh of a process again after 1 or 2 years, perhaps. Okay. So a second aspect of your diagnostic phase is checking your current tools, your current data sources, checking the quality of that. So that's also a bit where Dominique already talked about, checking which tools you have available, the models we have available, the canvases we have available on our website can definitely help you with that. And also it can help you to create some awareness throughout the organization. You might have a good gut feeling about where you stand, but when you do this exercise with a lot of people within your organization, it also creates awareness on where you stand. So that helps as well. Okay, so checking your toolings, you can check your operational tools, you can check your procurement tools. Quite often those are not yet aligned within organizations, so that's definitely an aspect where we see a lot of possibilities to improve in organizations. And lastly, once you're investigating where you're standing right now, we also advise to already interact in this very first phase with some of your providers. So we don't suggest that you get around with all your vendors, but pick 2, perhaps 3 providers and ask them for their honest feedback. Ask them what they think you are doing well in vendor management, where you can improve. They also have a pretty good view on that typically, because they also, of course, work with other clients. And we see that they often give you some valuable feedback in this exercise. Okay. So all of this together should help you to get a good view of where you stand. Of course, what you also want to do is going forward, and you have to define your goals. Where do you want to go to with your vendor management? Where do you want to go to with your contract management? So we see some possible objectives within organizations. It depends on the sector where you are working in. But three possibilities, three examples that we can see is the first one is actually checking if you get enough value out of your current contracts. You want to limit your value leakage. It's sometimes surprising to see contracts which are going on for 3, 4, 5 years without a lot of changes in the contract. But actually on the ground, there have been quite some changes. And then you see that the contract, the prices, the KPIs have not followed the path of the organization and are no longer in line with what the organization wants to do. And that can be value leakage. You're paying too much money for what you're actually getting out of the contract. Okay. A second possibility regarding the objectives, and that's something we typically see in some sectors like the financial sector, where you have the EBA and the EIOPA guidelines on outsourcing now. There are some new guidelines coming in shortly. So a lot of things are moving in those industries regarding compliance and reducing risks. Also because regulators are really looking strong into that, and you have some strict deadlines on that. So that might also be a goal, chief goal to start with in your vendor management and your contract management. Also other sectors, of course, like medical devices or pharma sector, also very regulated. So also very important to manage your contracts and your vendors very well. A third possible objective that we typically see, and for instance, this can be quite important in logistics, but also in other industries, is trying to improve your operational performance. So you might want to check if your operational performance is going very good and that all your vendors are actually helping you in achieving those operational objectives. Okay. So once you have your objectives clear to you, and you should also be taking care that you take notes of it, really formalize it in an official document where you really say to the organization, our primary goal of the next year in contract management and vendor management is to reach A, B, C. So don't leave it hanging out there. Really put it on paper, put it in a document, have a decent documentation of that as well. Next one in this phase, what our goal is, then you have to think about how you will organize, and that's on this slide, your VMO. That's the vendor management office, as we call it, within the organization. And we typically see 3 models. You have a support model, which actually says, like, as an organization, we have some minimal rules, some minimal guidelines that we want to follow everywhere. But most of your experts, the people who are actually doing the vendor management and contract management, are still in the different business units, like IT, finance, or other business units. So a lot of power to the business units where actually the interaction with your vendors and with your contract owners are taking place. On the other side, you have the lead vendor management office, and that is a totally different picture. What you're actually doing here is giving all the power to one central vendor management office, who typically reports to a CFO or chief risk officer or something. And what you're actually doing there is having the complete control of your vendor management and contract management within that team. And then you have, of course, a mixed model where you have some people in a central team who are giving best practices and giving ideas and supporting other persons who are still within your business units. Lastly, also think about stakeholder identification in this phase. So think about who in your organization will be involved in vendor management. Get them involved, alert them that there's an exercise going on, ask them for ideas. So create some awareness of what is going on. Very important as well. Okay, so once we have done that, we know where we currently stand. We also know where we want to go to. Then it's time to start initiating. Well, initiating a project like this is not very unlike initiating any other project. It's a matter of project management best practices, applying those principles. And that, of course, means the three important steps are looking at people, looking at process, and looking at technology. Technology, indeed, you can use a dedicated tool. So, like example, Sourcing Cockpit. Tony will talk some more about possibilities regarding software later in this webinar. So I don't go into much detail in this phase. People. Depending on what you have chosen as a vendor management office, you might want to look at who will be responsible to implement my vendor management process on a day-to-day basis. And we also stress that you may not underestimate what we ask from those people. Actually, we are asking people who are aware of what's going on within the business, so who understand the business, who know what's need to be done in the business, but also have some financial savviness, who know something about forwarding financial models, who also are good in interacting with third parties. So they need to have some soft skills. So it's not an easy task to do this. There's a lot of aspects coming to these people, and they need to be trained quite well. So you might want to check if perhaps some additional training is required, if some new skills need to be developed. That's something you need to take into account in the beginning of your project. And then, of course, the process. You have the different possibilities within your vendor management process. You have some internal processes, you have some external processes. Think about risk management. What are my risks with this contract? Are they documented? Do I have some possibilities to change things should that risk occur? You have also external processes. For instance, performance management. You will need to have some lines with your vendors on the key performance indices. They will need to report it. How will they report it? You will need to have some discussions about that. So a lot of those processes and sub-processes will need to be mapped and put in a plan, a project plan for the next weeks and next months. Okay, once you have your plan ready, your project plan ready, it's time to start implementing. And what we always suggest is that you should start small and then gradually build up until you reach your final state. So starting small, what does that mean? Start with a proof of concept. Choose one single contract. And please do not choose your most important critical contract to start with. It's not a good idea. Choose an important contract on your diagram that you have made. Choose a strategic contract, but perhaps not the most financially important one. Choose wisely which one you want to start with. So then, implement all your processes on that one contract. Perhaps you will already have some processes implemented. I'm sure that you will already have some KPIs or SLAs in place, but check if these are aligned with your best practices that you want to align throughout the organization, that it's automated, that you have a single view, that you have an automated view. Check if the necessary meetings are taking place, that you have all the reports from those meetings. And once you have done that, organize a lessons learned session, of course, and implement and interact with some other people within the organization to discuss how things have gone. And then move on to the next ones. Take 5 more contracts. Perhaps, depending on your situation, take 10 more contracts and do the prototype. Just repeat, plan, do, check, act, see if things are going well, and build it up gradually. Then again, if those 5 or 10 contracts are going well and things are industrialized, then you can really build up value. We suggest that you, at that stage, go for an entire business unit. For example, ICT, put all your ICT contracts in there that you want to have in there, or finance, put all your financial contracts and vendors in there, and build up the scale. Then again, after you have done that, you should have sufficient knowledge. The team should have sufficient knowledge and confidence to do it broadly within the organization. And then it's time to let things go. Give the authorization to your people to do it everywhere. and start implementing it on all business units within your organization. Okay, at this stage, we are almost at the end of our journey. And what do we want to do now? We want to check if the goals that we have defined in the beginning, if they have been realized. So you will need to check if your governance is up and running on the 3 levels, your tactical, operational, and strategic levels. Are the necessary meetings taking place? Do you get the right reports, SLA reports, performance reports? Do you have your spend management under control? Do you have your financial forecasting under control? So all those important processes should be in place, and you should easily see the status of each of those processes. You should also have some automated reporting available, so you know of your critical contracts, which ones are going well and which ones do have some action items assigned to them that will help you to improve the performance of those vendors and those contracts. So indeed, check also if your objectives, you're limiting your value leakage, increasing your compliance, reducing your risks, your operational performance, have they been achieved? If not, of course, you will need to assign some action items and check what you can do to improve that once again. Also, over the time, don't forget to check if those are still accurate. Organizations change, goals change. So it might well be that after 2 years, you might want to check, okay, indeed, in the beginning, the idea was to limit my value leakage because I had the feeling that we could get more out of our contracts. But perhaps after 2 years, you say, okay, this is under control. Now it's time to reducing my risks, improve my risk management. So make it something that lives. It's not a static process. Your supplier relationship management, it's something that will change together as your organization is changing. Okay, and with that, I'm at the end of the journey. And I think, Dominique, we will look at some operational tools now.
Yes, thank you very much for this very clarifying explanation, Koen. That was very clear. And I think as an operational, as a tactical tool, everybody will recognize that a good project and that a good staged approach will help you be successful in implementing your contract and vendor management process and operational tooling. So because I repeat it again, a fool with a tool is still a fool. If your organization and the individuals do not know how to implement and use an operational tool, that might not even be the right place to start, let alone not knowing the strategy you want to achieve and the tools I have shown. Now, we will not go into a demo today of the software, and I'll be happy to give a demo to any of you that has a request for a demo. Because we do have quite an extensive piece of software called Sourcing Cockpit, and that we will propose to you as a contract lifecycle management, third-party risk management, and supplier risk management, supplier relationship management tool, which Tony will further explain a bit. And before I go there, and before Tony takes over, I would like to give you a intro. There is somebody who is causing some background noise here.
Oh, die super. Ja, die waren in de aanbieding, dus ik dacht, ik neem dat ik ga werken. Maar ik heb ook nog even bij jou als je wil.
Okay, so there was some interference. Sorry for that. I hope you can still hear me all. So what we have, if I would ask you, well, can you identify in your supply chain what tool it is and who would be the manager? You would maybe say SAP with an SAP Ariba and a procurement tool behind it. You could do the same indeed for your sales process, where you have a Salesforce, HR, where you have maybe outsourced model with a Workday, your social media process, where you have a niche company focused on your Facebook campaigns, project management, where you have a project manager in charge, and you would use a tool like Virage. But many companies still have quite a bit of doubt on where do they put vendor management and what would be their tooling for vendor management. And because that's still a market in growth, yeah. And Tony, if I may ask you to pick it up from here and bring us indeed a bit more light on how Sourcing Cockpit is dealing with contract lifecycle management, third-party risk management, and supplier relationship management. Please, Tony.
Thank you, Dominique. Hello, everybody. Just please come back one chart, because there's good information on there. The fact is that, while we're here today, there isn't a recognized tool for vendor and contract management processes. What you are seeing are a lot of softwares in the procurement business, but they are looking at running tenders. They're looking at doing e-procurement like Ariba did when they started off. So there's a definite gap there, and that's what we're hoping to fill with the development of already the offer in helping customers to better organize their VMO process, and then to tool it up using the software, which is going to be like a support tool to the work done in developing the VMO processes. So as we move forward, so the software will be installed after perhaps quite a lot of preparatory work that will enable our team going in to look at how you are currently working in all the areas of, you will be assessing risks across your company. Somebody is doing that. There will be more and more people looking at cybersecurity risks. Of course, you will have a contract database. As the chart previously showed, unfortunately, that they may be distributed across the company in different places, in different filing cabinets. The difficulty, we will be looking here in priority at probably rather larger companies who may have business units and may not know in business unit A how the business is going with supplier X, when in business unit C it's not going so well. So the whole idea, I understand that centralization is a dirty word for a lot of people. Nevertheless, for key contracts where you have the same provider working in several areas, we will see that the best practices lead us to go down towards that road. So the key ingredients, of course, are going to be the supplier data. You have a supplier database, and you have a contract database also. You will almost certainly have renewal dates on there, but do you have the classification matrix as Dominique presented it to you? For the supplier base, it's the same thing. Do we have the classification matrix so you know really who are your key suppliers? I do a lot of work in procurement, and if you ask the question, actually I never cease to be amazed how many companies, they don't really know who their key suppliers are. They've never gone through the exercise to understand how they are. So the whole the parties of the relationships of the contracts and the way we renew them and the tools we use to do that will for some of them be done. So running the RFX, of course, we're not interested in doing that. What we are interested in is knowing that the results of that are, and who are the new suppliers that we are starting to work with. So moving forward to the next slide, please. So this is how the cockpit will put all these things into action. So there will be the records of all your contracts and all your providers and any projects you have with them. You will have the activities that you are doing with them. What are the processes? Are they formalized? How are you managing to deliver performance with these guys? Do we have an annual performance plan? What is going on? What are the activities that are going on in there? Who are the stakeholders there? So again, we're often going to be coming from a situation that is rather more distributed than it could be ideally. We're not talking about taking the responsibility away from the people in the business unit. What we're talking about is putting in a software tool in place that will allow everybody to share the information that everybody previously was not able to share. So getting the stakeholders on board is going to be a question. There's change management here. Having a team that implements the tool is going to be very important, to have a good team of people, so that the uptake will be good. The calendar piece is talking about the reviews that we do, the alerts we need to have. There are a lot of contract management tools out there that will basically be warehouses where you can store all your contracts. That's great. They may even give you the renewal dates, or to say, well, I need to see if I want to renew this 3 or 6 months before the end date. Again, we want to get this information into one place so that everybody can see how it's working. And once we've got these 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, sets of information together, then we can talk about having dashboards that everybody can see. What is the temperature? How are we doing today in managing our performance, in managing our compliance? I think that there is one major aspect of all this which is new. We see hacking problems all over the place now. The whole question of cybersecurity, especially when outsourcing contracts are leading you to having vendors that are handling sensitive information. How protected are they? We need to have more audits in this area, and we need to know if these things are going on successfully. Moving on, please. The software then is there to tie all these pieces together to make sure that everybody has access to the consolidated platform with all the information inside. So how do we implement it? Straight away onto the next page. That's what I'm going to show you now. Recent surveys have showed that unfortunately very few companies have even established, without talking about world-class, vendor management office maturity. Even the concept, the acronym VMO is not many people would know what that is. We do start to see on LinkedIn now some people who do tag their job as VMOs. It's very interesting. It's actually interesting for us to find them and try and tell them what we're doing here. But yeah, most companies are going to be in an exploratory phase where there is no real proper supply relationship management in place. So that's what all the preparatory work, in many ways, a consulting type job that Dominique and Koen have been talking about, which we can do without necessarily implementing the tool. The sourcing cockpit, however, is not the cherry on the cake. It's a vital part of putting all this into music together so that we can globally understand what's going on. So we can move on, please, to the next chart. So as we've said, there's lots of data out there. We know it is going to be in various places. We need to find it. We need to integrate it. We need to lead the actors. And a bit more obscure in there is finding the processes and the practices which you do have, but are not very well defined, are not formalized, and are not represented by real useful indicators that can really show you what's going on. So once we've started with a proof of concept, or even if you have a higher level of maturity, then we can come and introduce the software directly. In any case, the finality of the software is to model the processes and the practices that you are doing and pick up the indicators so that you can have them all in a central place and everybody has access to them. So moving on, we're going to see the process chart of software implementation. So my job over recent years has been implementing this type of tool and also project management tool. So we can say that the needs analysis action has already been done by what Dominique and Koen have been describing. So of course we'll have a launch meeting, we'll have a kickoff. Is to be able to know how we're going to do this, who will be involved in the team, who will be forming a part of the team, which will be very important in terms of uptake, in terms of getting people to accept the use of a new tool that they didn't have before. So once we're happy with that, there'll be installation. Now the software is offered on a SaaS basis, so there's no real worry about that. You don't need to introduce particularly any software onto your systems. It's a full web application, and from then on we are in the configure phase, where we would like to involve the customer actors from day one. There will be a customer admin who will learn all about the tool and be able to perform all the imports of the management of the new suppliers, the processes, and so on. So the configure process is going to enable us to set up all the receptacles, if you like, look at the processes you have and the data management operations that we've identified previously.
And I'd like, if you
set up,
Tony, I'd like to add something to this configure. And I think that's one of the core elements of Sourcing Cockpit, is that there is a lot of template-based elements in there, which allow each and every customer admin to build their own activity process templates and to build their task templates. If you want to build a risk assessment, you build it in Sourcing Cockpit. If you want to build your own RFI and RFP process task, you build it in Sourcing Cockpit. So you have a lot of building capabilities to configure. We do not have to do programming with the cockpit, because it is a very flexible, activity-based, template-driven environment that enables you to do multiple templates, even in multiple countries. It could even be that you have a multi-language template where you say, well, look, I have to interact for a certain part with providers in Chinese. Well, you build a Chinese template. So it gives you all the building and configuration possibilities to build all your tasks and all your activities that you have engaged in your process. And as I said, a fool with a tool is a fool. If you do not know, you cannot build. And of course, it comes out of the box with a lot of pre-configured templates how to do these things. But the power is indeed in that configuration possibility.
Thank you, Dominique. So now the sequences we're seeing here, we could say will apply in an initial case for a POC, and to a large extent would be repeated when you're going through a prototype, and then a rollout to a larger scale. So once the tool is set up, then we can start really to integrate all the existing data. We will be able to import a lot of the data you will be on Excel files. We know that. We know you have these Excel files. We are able to import them and then set up APIs that will be able to update the data going forward with a more live interactive update of all the data that may be on your systems. Now, I must insist again on the ideal customer team here being a small, skilled team representing key customer functions to make the initial tests and adjust the configuration as needed. In any case, adequate testing is required before contemplating larger scale rollout. The worst thing that can happen here is that users fail to find a benefit from using the Sourcing Cockpit. Remember, resistance to change in using new tools is always going to be there. Once we're happy everything is okay, then we can start to train the teams on how to use the software. There will be like an approval to say, well, okay, customer is happy. There'll be a gate, a milestone to say that the initial configuration is okay. And then training will take place. It's not that difficult. 2-hour session is sufficient for most contract managers in groups of 8. No more, 8, because it's good to have smaller teams. It's not because of COVID. It's just it makes for better training. During the initial phases, during a POC and even a prototype, we recommend a period of assistance on demand to make sure that that uptake is good. And then there we are. So in conclusion, for me, the outcomes of Sourcing Cockpit are the ones that enable a lead VMO way of working to set up and to work. One place for all the actors to share the information, like the dashboard that Dominique's put on the screen, that is currently not centralized, is rather to be found in a large quantity of separate Excel files and spreadsheets somewhere. One place for the dashboards that give meaningful views on the supplier portfolio, and one place to hold all the audit information that is becoming vital in some regulated sectors such as banking and pharmaceuticals.
And one place indeed, if I may add, Tony, and thank you very much for this clarifying approach with your depth and breadth of implementing a software across the globe. I would say thank you for sharing this. And I would say indeed one place indeed to manage your vendor and contract management process. So we're now related back to the life cycle, to the risk management, and indeed to the relationship. We are convinced that indeed our tool called Sourcing Cockpit is a flexible and configurable tool that enables you to execute that process with all the activities indeed that you have ongoing. And an activity can indeed be a project activity, a pre-contract activity, like a business case that you want to connect later onto the contract, or a selection or an RFI that you want to connect to the contract, or an activity can be indeed your recurring reviews that you have planned out into your calendar. You have one place where you have your full breadth, full spectrum of contract and vendor management across the life cycle. And I do think this is a differentiator for Sourcing Cockpit, that it is not focused on procurement only, or it is not focused on risk only, or it is not focused on spend only. It is focused on the activities that you do with your vendors and your contracts. And that activity set, as I said, is a very configurable template-based environment. Secondly, indeed, as you mentioned, the calendar, it alerts you. And also the alerts are configurable in the software, where you have different alerts based on your activities and based on your tasks, and it will alert you during the life cycle of your total contract. Thirdly is indeed the actionability of it. I mean, if you just have a platform that sits there and holds data without really helping you to be active in terms of when do I have to do something, when is an action item overdue, and the like. And then last but not least, and you said it as well, Tony, there is a lot of stakeholders involved very often. So you have indeed your co-workers, but you also have the experts you involve. And also their Sourcing Cockpit helps you, for instance, to invite a legal officer and be part of your process or part of the process, or to invite an expert from security to help and do the security assessment, or an expert from procurement that comes and assists you in a task which might be a benchmark of which procurement is involved. Again, there it is a flexible system that allows you to cope with the large amount of stakeholders involved, and also your providers. They also have a environment in which they are allowed to contribute and upload their performance dashboards, be active in risk assessments, be active in selection processes and tasks. So again, they're an important stakeholder part of your process. And then indeed, behind the scenes, you have your overviews with what you have to do on which contract and for which provider, which gives you comprehensive information from a usability point of view. And with this, I would like to finish it off. And thank you very much for your participation. As I indicated on our website, you can find the tools that I've explained. So the contract classification, the tooling and maturity and quality assessment, and also your vendor classification approach. You can also request for a demo. I'll be happy to dig into with any of you into the software and give you all the capabilities that we've explained on how you manage projects, how you manage contracts, how you manage vendors, with the activities on it, with then of course the stakeholders involved, with the calendar events, and then of course the deep dive into the dashboarding. So with this, I would like to call it a day. If you have any question, we still have a couple of minutes left. If you would have any question, I'll be happy to answer any of those specific questions. And if not, happy to have you here. Thank you very much to my colleague Koen for explaining on the operation, on the technical side of the tooling. Thank you very much, Tony, for your thought-provoking ideas on how to implement this. And also thank you to all the participants You were quite numerous today, so thank you to everybody who was part of this webinar. And hopefully we'll be able to organize something in real life next year and see each other, shake hands, hug each other as well, because I'm a bit of a hugger. So let's hope we can do that as of next year again into a live session. And if there's no more questions, I'll be happy to close it off and still leave it open for a couple of months.